Well, Stephen, it's always good to have you on the programme. Thank you very much indeed for joining us again.
Nice to see you again, Alan.
We've been seeing reports coming in from the Middle East that Syria appears to be preparing for attack. There's the whole Iran nuclear issue. Mm-hmm. There are people talking of, to coin a cliche, the storm clouds of war gathering. Mm-hmm. Is that the case?
I don't believe so. I believe that Hezbollah are simply, it's a bit of a show of strength. Hezbollah is working with Syria. Both of them are trying to gradually have predominant influence in Lebanon. Lebanon is gradually shifting from a pro-Western position to an anti-Western position, say on sanctions against Iran. So Syria and Hezbollah are succeeding. So at this time, no, they don't want a war. The Israelis would win it. They would win the fighting part of it quite easily. Rather, I think a political advances is what they're up to. So I don't predict war in the near future.
What about Iran? Because that is seen by many countries as a destabilizing influence in the whole region because of its nuclear aspirations and because it is a bit of a loose cannon in almost every respect.
Indeed.
So what's going to happen there? There are draft sanctions before the UN. Mm-hmm. Is that going to do anything, or is it just a talking show?
Let's divide this into two parts. First of all, sanctions. Will they do any good? And next, if they don't do any good, what next? Okay, what about the sanctions? The sanctions are voluntary. The recommendations in the draft, this is a draft that the United States is circulating. It recommends to various states that they don't sell arms to Iran. They don't allow people in their country, they don't give visas to people known to be participating in the nuclear development program. They attempt to freeze the assets and not allow banking in their country if it directly finances nuclear development. But the whole resolution is couched in terms of urging, recommendation, voluntary compliance. There is no mechanism to check on compliance, no punishment for governments that ignore it. And even if there was an enforcement mechanism, there's no provision to root out smuggling, deception, and other devices that Iran has used very effectively to get the sort of material, technology, and weapons from Pakistan, for example, from Russia, from North Korea, and other places. So unfortunately, this latest round of sanctions, even if it gets China and Russia to approve it, is not going to be effective.
With Russia and China, it's going to be a hard ask to get them to come on board at all, isn't it?
Absolutely. The Russians are selling a nuclear plant to Iran. The Chinese have very important oil supply contracts with Iran. They're both skeptical. Now they've been joined by Turkey and by Brazil. In other words, it's not narrowing down, but it's widening. Iran is diplomatically very successful in persuading other governments, most recently Turkey, that previously was Western-leaning, was cooperating with Israel in, say, military exercises, but is now moving slightly towards the Islamic and Iranian direction, persuading these governments then to be skeptical about these resolutions, maybe to vote against the sanctions in the Security Council, or at least to show that Iran is not isolated. It, in fact, has a small but growing circle of countries that want to, shall we say, be tolerant of Iran's ambitions.
Meanwhile, Egypt, which has always certainly been seen as relatively friendly towards Israel, now Egypt is apparently putting pressure on for Israel's nuclear capabilities to be made more public. So is that are they losing friends in the region?
It's another indicator, Alan, that the relationship with Egypt and Israel has always been a cool one. Now it's getting cooler. That is, the Egyptians don't want to be seen as pro-Israeli. Maybe they see a change in the Middle East, a slight hardening of the position against Israel, against the United States, and slightly more sympathy for Iran. Now, I think this is an adverse development, but there are some evidence that it is happening, and that the Obama administration, by being consultative, by being multilateral, by being polite, is being perceived in the Arab world as being weak. So that politeness is not a strength, but rather a liability for United States leadership. There are some analysts who say, look, Obama should stand up and take a firm position. Many Arab governments would respect that. They would rally to his side if he looks like he's going to be a winner. But if he looks like he's going to be a loser, they'll flake away from the U.S. position. They'll start making other arrangements with the powers that be. Iran might be one of those powers in future.
There are peace talks at last between the Palestinian Authority and Israel. They were on and then they were off, and then they were more off, and then they were on a bit, and then they were off again. Are they going to get anywhere?
No, they're not getting anywhere, partly because, again, the United States has been pressuring Israel. The Palestinians perceive the following. Wait a while, Obama will extract more concessions from the Israeli government. Therefore, we don't have to make any concessions. Obama will do it for us. Of course, there's the conflicted issue of Hamas as the governing authority in Gaza. So the Palestinians are split down the middle. Who are we going to negotiate with? Who is Israel? Who is the spokesperson for the Palestinians? And some would say for Hamas, it's probably in Tehran. Iran is the bankroller for a lot of what happens in Gaza and in the Hezbollah in southern Lebanon. So maybe we should really be talking to Iran, and that's all part of the nuclear question, the terrorist question, the financing of radical anti-Islamic groups, destabilization of the Lebanon. Iran, you come back to Iran every time as being taking the greatest initiatives and making the greatest progress, adverse progress in my view, but progress in its own view towards greater influence in that region.
Because we've spoken to an expert on Iran in the past who told us that we see Iran, in the West, we see Iran as a nation that doesn't necessarily have that much power. But from the Iranians' point of view, they are the inheritors of a very ancient and huge Persian Empire. Mm-hmm. They want to be seen as a major superpower.
Yes, and in that they share with China the same view. China has a great history. They want to get back to the central position in the world. And it's an ambition that does drive them to enormous risks, costs. The Iran-Iraq War, for example, confronting the United States. So history, I think, speaks loudly, and we have to take that into account. What can we do about it? That's the question.
Well, that's the $64 million question I was going to ask you.
Governments have to live today, and they have to have policies that will have consequences tomorrow. One analyst say, look, it's almost inevitable Iran will get a nuclear device, like North Korea has done in the past decade. When that happens, are we ready? Can we begin now to do research and policy debate on how to live with a nuclear Iran? What sort of policy? Maybe a containment policy that did work on the Soviet Union, or some other policy. But now is the time to prepare for the worst case scenario, because the worst case scenario will become the present before very many years.
Stephen, thank you very much indeed.
You're welcome.